Welcome back to Casuals Corner. You're joined by myself, Will, and today I'm going to be breaking down one of the most exciting heavyweight fights in history, Ciryl Gane versus Francis NGannou. So let's get underway and have a look at how these two beasts break down. As I just said, this is arguably the most exciting heavyweight fight of all time. And on top of that, we have the perfect ex-training partners narrative. Is it a huge deal? Probably not. Is it being made into a huge deal? Of course it is. This is the entertainment factory we're dealing with, the UFC. And of course we have Francis's ex-coach and Ciryl Gane's current coach, Fernand Lopez, the pioneer of French MMA, has been on every single news broadcasting platform there is, giving his perspective. For those that do know, or for those that don't know, we'll just quickly recap what had happened before we get into the breakdown. The two once trained together at MMA Factory in Paris. Ciryl Gane was helping Francis to prepare for a fight when he was ranked number 5, I believe. And there are several clips of the two sparring together where we can clearly see Ciryl is probably getting the better of Francis. However, on Francis's countdown video, he alluded to there being a clip of Ciryl getting dropped by Francis that they didn't put out. And Fernand also came back to that and said there's a video of Ciryl dropping Francis with a knee that they won't release. There has been a lot of he said, she said, and the man that is coolest in the heat of it all has been Ciryl Gane. And lastly, to add gasoline to the already burning fire, there is also that famous clip of Francis ignoring his ex-coach and training partners in the UFC hallway. I actually listened to an interview where he explained that he saw Fernand and didn't actually realise his training partners were there and just didn't think it'd be a good idea to go over and say hello. A pretty plausible excuse, but nothing really to dive into. However, that all goes out the window this Saturday because we get to finally see them lock the cage doors and get down to business, which begs the question, how do I see it playing out? With Ciryl, we know the fighter we're going to get, an extremely high-level striker who also can threaten submissions and takedowns, has great grappling, and can confuse you with a full arsenal of attacks and have you second-guessing your every strike and movement. Extremely draining. We saw this most noticeably against Derek Lewis, where he peppered the front leg of Lewis, not only making it hard for him to sit down on that famous right hand of his, but also have him anticipating that low kick. And Gane will then use that to his advantage. Gane was staying all out of range and using that kick and keeping himself safe whilst doing it from a distance, and this is something that he does very, very well. As I said before, he uses a full arsenal of attacks in his striking game, so we'll most likely see that low kick, which not only will have Francis thinking about it, making him more stationary as the fight goes on, he is less versed in switching stances as effectively, so this is going to be quite detrimental to Francis. But he also will show a hop side kick, we'll see flying knees, and an attack he utilises so well is the body kick from the southpaw stance, which we saw most noticeably against JDS, and you can see him on tape checking his ribs, seeing if they're still there because they feel like they're on absolute fire. But what this allows Gane to do is feint that body kick and step through fully into range where he likes to be, and we'll see him staying very safe and look to land attacks on the inside and land attacks in the clinch and utilising his Muay Thai background. We will also see with Ciryl his range control is brilliant, and he doesn't offer, if ever, find himself in no man's land. He's either fully in range or fully outside of range. If he's in range, he's landing knees, he's landing short elbows, uppercuts, or he's on the outside and he's popping you with a laser jab from both stances and pulling you onto his punches and peppering your front leg and your body. It'll be interesting to see whether or not Gane finds himself in that clinch situation against the fence, whether he will look to stay heavy on Francis. He doesn't necessarily need to look to muscle down a single leg or a double leg, but if he can just get hold of a body lock and make Francis carry his weight with the potential option in the later rounds of utilising his trips to wear on Francis and continue to sap the energy, because he has a very apparent threat on the ground, and if it's there in the later rounds and he's beaten up Francis's body and leg for 15-20 minutes and manages to grab a body lock against the cage, there is every possibility Gane will jump onto a neck or maybe even jump onto a leg. So I think when we look at Gane, we know most likely he likes to take reads in the opening 1 or 2 rounds and try to keep himself as safe as possible, and he'll do this throughout the whole fight, and he avoids taking risks if he enters close range. We will usually see that nice tight high guard that he uses and the ability to roll in and out of the pocket to make sure that he isn't taking damage. He'll look to wear Francis down with kicks to the body and his legs, but also his feints. The feints alone are going to be a massive part of this fight, because how much Gane can offer, you have to constantly be thinking at 100%. Like I said, he could even just jump in a flying knee at any point, which is extremely draining. So we know the later this goes, the more it will begin to factor into the Frenchman's game plan. However, on the other hand, we have Le Predator. Now, we can visually see the improvements Francis has made over time, to his striking, to his understanding of pressure, his fight IQ, his octagon time, his takedown defense, which was on display against Curtis Blades and most recently Stipe. But if we have a look at Ngannou's average cage time, it is around 10 minutes on the dot, which is coincidentally where I would say he holds his biggest threat in those first 2 rounds. And another thing which I alluded to, cage time. He hasn't had a lot of it. Now, of course, we know his power translates to any minute of the fight whatsoever, but typically where he's at his best, where he's at his sharpest, is in those early rounds. And I've heard him reference in interviews he can't see it going past 2 rounds. Now, I know a lot of this camp would have been focused on conditioning, and this is what I think will be the most important factor for him, is how he looks to manage that. In the Gane-Lewis fight, we could see Lewis back off and give Ciryl space, and the next thing you know, he's taking over. So Francis has to make sure he is constantly applying pressure, but smart pressure. Not necessarily crashing forward, swinging it every second, but not allow Gane to dictate the entirety of play. Now, I know this is easier said than done. He will have to trade, he will have to be happy to stand there in the pocket and eat a low kick or a jab, but to constantly remind Gane at what is coming back at him. Because if he doesn't stamp his authority early in the fight, sooner rather than later, the fight will begin to slip away as his limbs are dismantled one by one, and Gane will look to break down every attack of Francis Ngannou. Now, we know that Francis will likely want to finish this early, and we know Gane has an incredibly high fight IQ. So Francis Ngannou has to be very meticulous with everything he throws, and making sure that he isn't getting lured into showing Gane all of his cards. Because of course that power goes into the later rounds, but as soon as attacks become predictable, he'll begin to lose that battle. Now that power becomes ineffective if Gane has a read on everything he's about to throw, so he needs to be a little bit reserved. Francis can also look to use his own kicking game to turn the tide. Now we know that Gane relies a lot on movement, so even if Francis can invest on the inside leg, for example, when he switches to southpaw, he can potentially look to take out one of Gane's attacks, or at least allow him to utilise it less, which again, going back to my point of the feints, is just one less thing Francis has to focus on, and now he has a slightly more predictable and a slightly more stationary target. Only slightly. As I mentioned before, we know Ciryl is either all in or all out, so it could be an idea for Francis to look to make some reads on the way that he exits the pocket off of certain attacks, where he can potentially land an uppercut of his own, or in truth just make contact, because we know he throws to hurt and it does not take much. We've also seen Ngannou threaten submissions of his own before, and with the crazy natural strength that he possesses, the ability just to clamp onto something and muscle his way into a position is very, very apparent. And it's similar to the fight that we saw against Hamilton, where he locked in that Kimura, muscled it to the ground and finished the fight. To conclude, with any fight with Francis Ngannou, it is almost impossible to call at times, because he truly has the greatest equalizer there is. But if you push me to an answer, I would have to say Ciryl Gane on this. The improvements Ngannou has made are apparent, and of course he has the ability for a flash knockout, and any given second we know this. But essentially I ask myself, does Ciryl Gane have the footwork, the speed, the IQ to stay out of danger for that initial 10-15 minutes, and then look to take over and make Ngannou fight at his pace and chase him? Yes, I do. I think he will look to play with him and make reads in the first 2, feint and work his way into range, whilst landing a diversity of attacks that Ngannou simply will struggle to compute, and may find himself in the late rounds looking disheartened and preying on a big knockout, which he would chase and then get picked apart. Ngannou is one tough man to stop. I'm going to make a bold statement and say this could be the best performance we've seen from Ciryl Gane, and he stops Ngannou in the 5th round in a similar fashion to Derek Lewis. But this is going to be an incredible fight. Like I said, it is impossible to call, but let me know in the comments how you think this one's going to play out. And as always, enjoy the fights.